Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. For those unaware, I did get sick with COVID. Yes, I am vaxxed. This is the first time I've ever had COVID in my entire life. I did not get it during the original bout when everybody was locked indoors with the pandemic. I didn't get it over the next few years either. I just developed it literally over the holiday season, probably because I was out shopping. I was with family, friends, in crowds, and the like. This is kind of a new experience for me because I'm one of those people that needs to constantly be doing something, working, going to the gym. So I have still been working roughly 12 hours a day. I just could not go to the gym. I did try to go to the gym for a little bit there. I only lasted like 20, 30 minutes on the treadmill. And then finally my doctor told me, hey, you got to take a couple of weeks off from the gym at least to take it easy to make sure that this gets out of your system. For those that are unaware, I am actually immunocompromised. I suffer from celiac disease and also rheumatoid arthritis. So I do take certain medications like methotrexate that pretty much tone down my immune system. So I knew at some point I would eventually get COVID or one of the other many respiratory systems that were going around in December of 2024. So that's most likely what happened. So I am trying to take it easy. I do apologize for the break as to how many days have passed since I've been able to upload a video. With that being said, I am trying to go full in on things here. So the first thing I want to talk about is always remember when we talk about speculation versus investing in the antiques and collectibles trade. If you're going to go to the market and you're going to pay the market price for a vintage collectible, doesn't matter if it's a rare coin, a comic book, a Pokemon card, whatever it is, if it's in the category of vintage, if you're paying a market price for that item, keep in mind that by definition is going to have to be in most cases a long-term investment for you, meaning you're probably going to have to hold that piece 3, 5, possibly 7 to 10 years to eke out a realistic gain in that item. Now, there's exceptions to every rule. For instance, if you were investing in vintage comic books right around 2017, 2018, then the pandemic came and prices soared to all-time highs, you could literally sell those comic books right into the market and eke out a profit. So there always is exceptions to the rule. But in most cases, when we're talking about tying money up in vintage collectibles and you're going to the market, you're logging on to Heritage, you're logging on to Hakes, you're logging on to eBay, you're paying the current market price for those collectibles. In most cases, that has to be looked at as a more mid to long-term investment. Now, on the flip side, when we talk about speculation, when we talk about buying a lot of mass-produced modern era collectibles. Right now, everybody's going crazy for Pokemon cards, right? As a matter of fact, that'll probably be the thumbnail for this video. The shelves are bare at your local retailer, whether it's Walmart, Target, Best Buy. People are going nuts for modern era Pokemon cards at present time. Those type of items, if you can get them, if you can buy them, if you know what you're doing, they can be flipped for a profit in certain cases almost immediately. So what I want to address in this video, right now I'm seeing a lot of posts on Reddit, on Facebook groups, on collecting forums, where people are kind of wondering, what are the pros and cons of investing in, say, vintage Pokemon cards versus modern era Pokemon cards? Because these markets have to be looked at differently. You can't apply the same logic that you would use to cash in on the current speculative boom in modern era Pokemon cards if you're attempting to invest in vintage Pokemon cards. And I waited a while to do this video because there seems to be some weird rift between vintage Pokemon collectors and modern era Pokemon collectors. And honestly, as somebody that just likes Pokemon, I really don't understand it. There seems to be this belief where if you're investing in vintage Pokemon products, it's dead money. And I don't really fully agree with that. Now, it's true, especially right now, especially during the pandemic, modern era Pokemon products have accelerated in value exponentially. Let's be realistic here. You can compare Pokemon products, modern era Pokemon products, to every investment out there, and pretty much it's almost going to come in top. I honestly did an analysis of the top collecting categories for the year 2024. I already released that video on this channel. I wrote an article for Antiques and Auction News on this, and modern era Pokemon products came in right behind graded vintage toys. So Pokemon products, modern era Pokemon products, were number 2 of the hottest collecting categories of 2024. And honestly, if we would extend that list into 2025, I would probably tell you right now, Pokemon's going to be the top collecting category thus far in 2025. Now, don't forget, guys, we still have another 11 months to go. So it's going to be interesting to see where this ends up. But there is a mass frenzy in modern era Pokemon products that is just not letting up anytime soon. I mean, you can see the videos out there on YouTube, on TikTok, even on Facebook. I'm seeing people post stuff where people go to a Costco or they go to a Walmart, they get restocked, and people are like fighting it out to get modern era Pokemon cards. And if you look at the prices on eBay, if you look at the prices on TCG Player, you can see people are flipping this stuff into the market and they're making a substantial amount of money. Now, what does all this mean? Well, when we look at vintage Pokemons versus modern era Pokemons, instead of calling them Pokemon cards, Pokemons. Well, anyway, the vintage cards have more of a finite supply and they're more organic. Now, that is something that I think that we all can agree with. Now, whether or not you like the style, the design, the flavor of the vintage cards, because let's be realistic, back in the day, especially during the coveted WotC era, they didn't really have the awesome, incredible, full art styles that they have now. Also, the Pokemon Company, by and large over the years, got very smart. There are certain modern cards that are harder to pull in the modern era than that of their vintage counterparts. So I do have to give credit there, where there are cards that are much harder to pull from packs, from sealed product today, than back in the day, back in 1999, 2000, when Pokemon was a thing, when people were going to the market buying booster boxes of Jungle First Edition, Fossil First Edition, all that fun stuff, tearing them open. You kind of knew what was in those packs. Today, it's a little bit of a puzzle sometimes, and that's why some of these cards are trending for serious amounts on the secondary market. Now, whether or not I agree with that, that's another video entirely. But what I will tell you is, when it comes to vintage cards, you pretty much know what you're buying. We already have population reports that have filled up quite nicely, whether you're a PSA guy like me or a CGC guy, whoever you have a preference for third-party card grading, they have population reports in most cases, if they're a reputable company, and you can see how many cards are graded of a certain genre, of a certain set. If it's a, first edition holofoil, if it's a secret rare, if we're talking about Sky Ridge, you can see all that information. So pretty much we know what the overall supply is in the general market for vintage cards. The problem is when we look at modern era Pokemon cards and we try to gauge demand 20 years from now. You need to realize that because people are hoarding a lot of these modern era factory seal booster boxes and sets, there's going to be a lot more product readily available in, just to use this as an example, 2045 versus that of equivalent vintage sets that people are now taking an interest in 2025. So if we're looking at the latest set, Surging Sparks, there's a lot of people that are keeping that factory sealed, much like Evolving Skies. And I know every time I say Evolving Skies, people go nuts because people love Evolving Skies because that is the primo product of the modern age. There's a lot of Pokemon collectors. Every time I bring up Pokemon has risks, a little Pokemon Timmy in the comment section, what about Evolving Skies? Evolving Skies, look at how much it's going for per booster box, per case. I get it, guys. But just understand, there's a lot of that product that is being held in factory sealed condition. Back in the day, back in the late 1990s, I was there. I was born in 1976. So I was in college back then. People would at least buy the product, they would open it, they would handle the cards, and they would play the game. There wasn't this obsession where if you're going to open up a pack, it had to be done wearing gloves. You would put that card in a sleeve and you would send it off to third-party grading. In 1999, third-party grading of cards, especially collectible trading cards, was not really a thing like it is today. That was made a thing due to the Pokemon and Magic the Gathering boom. So this is something that we have to take into account when we analyze the market and the potential for the market of vintage cards versus modern era Pokemon cards. Now, in 2025, I think we all agree, demand for Pokemon is higher now than it ever has been before. I've done videos on this. I've talked about Pokemon upping the print runs on a lot of these cards. They're now producing billions upon billions of cards per year. And yes, it's true. There still are some quote-unquote scarce, rare, secret cards into the mix that are not getting as high of print runs as your standard Pokemon cards. But you have to take all this into account because people are hoarding this stuff in immaculate condition. So let me sum this up for you. Over the short term, modern Pokemon products can offer higher returns as vintage cards tend to slowly appreciate over the long term. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of people out there, especially younger collectors, that for whatever reason, they think that people going after the vintage stuff are just tying up dead money, meaning they're taking on unnecessary risk. And I do not agree with that because if you look at any other collecting hobby, where do you see a market where the vintage stuff is looked down upon when compared to modern era products? I mean, even if we look at video games, if we look at vintage video games and we look at the market from when Nintendo came on the scene, most video game collectors I know that love Nintendo, they're going after factory sealed, graded, complete in box, rare, original Nintendo games. That's what they want. They don't sit there and go, well, I love Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch is better than the original Nintendo. Therefore, I don't want the original Nintendo stuff. That's not happening. The same thing is true in comic books. If we look at the market for comic books, Golden Age comic books are the backbone of the comic book collecting community. Even if you prefer to collect Silver Age, maybe Bronze Age, maybe Copper Age is your thing. Most Copper Age collectors are not going, well, gee, Golden Age comics suck. Now, maybe you don't have a preference for that market. Maybe in certain cases you can't afford to play in that market. But most comic book collectors are not turning their noses on vintage comic books just because maybe they prefer the art style or the stories that are being made current in the year 2025. And this is something that the Pokemon market has to get around because I'm even seeing like YouTubers have to comment on this, where there seems to be this hidden cabal of secret collectors that are manipulating the prices for vintage Pokemon cards. And a lot of us in that group, we turn up our noses at modern era Pokemon cards. That's really not true, guys. You understand, just because I like vintage Pokemon doesn't mean that I have disdain for modern era Pokemon products. It's just from a long-term investment horizon, Vintage is where I find a lot of the value and investment potential over the long term. Now, again, over the short term, you're absolutely right. If you can go to the market right now, those of you that are pre-ordering a lot of these products, and let's say you're what? You're paying $150, $160, $170 a booster box, and that booster box goes crazy and you can flip it into the market. What's Surging Sparks going for now? I think Surging Sparks is close to like $300 a booster box. If you can flip that into the market and you can make a tidy profit, you're doing very well. I'm not going to criticize you for that. What I am going to criticize is the person that attempts to hoard modern era Pokemon products for the long term and thinks they're going to keep going up in value exponentially year after year. In my opinion, as an expert in the antiques and collectibles trade, that can happen, but there's too much supply that you have to take into account if you're going to act on that. There are better opportunity costs for that money than tying up money in modern era Pokemon products for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And this is why when I have people that come to me through my consulting business, I will tell them my advice to you, if you are holding on to a lot of modern era Pokemon products, sell into the hype, take some of that money and put it in a well-diversified financial portfolio. You don't have to sell it all. I am not telling anybody to sell everything. I'm just telling them that taking the profits, putting it in a well-diversified financial portfolio, or even diversifying into vintage Pokemon products is a better strategy than hoarding a lot of this mass-produced modern era products over the long term. The key to understanding collectible finance is understanding how these markets work and understanding the dynamics of vintage and antique products versus that of modern era products. You know, one of the things that I get into a lot of debates with, there's a lot of people that'll come to me and they'll first discover this channel and they'll be like, Sean, you're dead wrong. Because at one point, an Action Comics 1 was a modern era product. You see where their mind goes? So they think because Action Comics 1 at one point was a modern era product, if they go to the market and they buy modern era products and they hold it for the long term, those items are going to always go up in value. The problem that you have with that scenario is Action Comics 1, when it first premiered in 1938, was not hoarded by people. It was not seen as a collectible. Today, pretty much everything mass-produced, if it's being produced by Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast, which is owned by Hasbro, Lego, even video game companies like Nintendo, Limited Run, Sony, they have these problems. People are all hoarding this stuff in factory sealed condition, waiting for it to pop in value on the secondary market. That is a recipe for disaster if we're all holding the same stuff. And if we look at the pandemic, that's pretty much what was happening during the pandemic. We were all holding the same stuff, and the people who made money were the people that sold into the hype. That's why I often tell you guys, you should be selling some of this into the market, taking those profits and putting them into assets that have underlying cash flows. Because that way you can at least get paid a regular interest payment if you're putting it in bonds or certificates of deposits. If you're putting it in like the S&P 500 index, you get the capital appreciation of the S&P 500 year after year. You also get a dividend payment every 3 months. So that's the strategy that you should be employing if you're engaging in this market. But I just want to make this very clear. Vintage product is not dead. It is not dead money. It's the same thing with vintage Magic the Gathering products. Now, obviously, if we're going to compare Pokemon to that of Magic the Gathering, Pokemon is the proverbial king. Magic the Gathering does not hold a candle to Pokemon. It's a distant second category compared to Pokemon. But the people that grew up with Magic the Gathering, make no mistake, there is a lot of organic collectability there. So those people that want to go after like your workshop, your libraries, your Bazaar of Baghdad's, those cards will always have demand and value for that reason. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to 10x your money every single year because you bought a Black Lotus. Let's be realistic here. But it's not really dead money. I don't like the way a lot of modern era collectors and speculators operating in these markets are looking at a lot of vintage products. And I'm even seeing this like right now, comic books. Comic books are pretty much down. As a matter of fact, Graded Comic Books in 2024 was one of the worst performing collectible markets in the entire trade. It's tied with Graded Video Games. I'm going to be doing a video on this. But even with Graded Comic Books, there still is opportunity there. They're not going to zero anytime soon. I want to make that very clear. So if you're one of these individuals that is a smart investor and you're going to the market and you're looking up certain key issues and you're noticing that certain graded vintage comic books have dropped, 20, 30% in value, if you're patient, you understand the opportunity cost of tying up the money in that market for could be several years before that market recovers. If it recovers, you can make some smart moves in that market. It doesn't mean that it's dead money. So this is something that I always wanted to comment on because there's a lot of people that incorrectly don't understand the differences between long-term investment in vintage product versus modern era speculation. And in this day and age where everybody wants to 10 times their money, obviously the modern products are going to have the edge. Because if all you got to do is show up at Walmart or Target at the right time when they're stocking the shelves, and you can buy that stuff, take it home, and flip it on eBay immediately, of course there's going to be people that are engaged in that. It's free money. Why wouldn't you? So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I don't want to go off on a rant too much in this video. I've already been speaking for close to 22 minutes. If you want me to expand on these core concepts, I will. The gist of this video is, please understand, vintage product of anything, whether it's rare coins, comic books, video games, Pokemon cards, Magic the Gathering, whatever you're collecting, if it's vintage, it's usually seen as a longer time investment horizon than that of mass-produced modern era products. Now, obviously, if you're a reseller, if you're a comic book dealer and you're able to buy like vintage comic books for like 70 or 80% of the current market value or sometimes less, yeah, you can flip them immediately into the market and make a profit. I'm talking from an investment standpoint, meaning you're looking to buy an Amazing Fantasy 15. You look up the value of that book. You're willing to pay the current market price. If you're going to buy that book, that's going to most likely be a mid to long-term investment hold for you, as opposed to the latest, variant modern era comic book that's just being marketed as a gimmick that if you're lucky enough to buy it, you can send it to CGC, get it graded, and 5 times your money on that item, or in some cases 10, 20 times your money. So that's how you got to look at these markets, guys. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate your patience while I get rid of this wonderful COVID flu thing that I have. Thank you.